Everybody, and welcome back to our Bible study today, Genesis chapter 46. We're almost done with the first chapter of the Bible. There are 50 chapters in Genesis, so there's only 65 books left to go. Luckily, they're not all as long as Genesis, although the book of Psalms, that'll be fun, but we'll deal with that when we get there. Thanks to everybody who's been joining us every day for these studies, and if you haven't been, and maybe this is your first one, just know that our goal is to go through one chapter of the Bible every day until we complete every chapter, and Lord willing, that's what we're going to do. We also have free PDFs with all this information that you're going to see up on the screen. You can download those for free, print them off, use them in a Bible class, Bible study, to teach somebody, family devotional, whatever. They're available down there, and thanks to the patrons who support this channel, they keep everything free. Now, Genesis chapter 46. When did these events occur? Well, we know that Joseph became a ruler of Egypt when he was 30 years old. That would be approximately 1715 BC. We know that the events of chapter 46 occurred about 9 years after that. We know that because Joseph says that they were 2 years into the 7-year famine that Pharaoh's dream had predicted back in, I think, chapter 41. And so this is 9 years after Joseph became a ruler. That would date this to approximately 1706 BC. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time reintroducing our main characters because we've talked about them all. We obviously have Joseph. We've been following his life story, and he is a powerful man in Egypt at this point. We've got his brothers. These were the sons of Jacob and, well, one of his 4 wives. He had sons with all 4 of his wives. Then Pharaoh, who's obviously the king of Egypt, and Jacob. Jacob was the grandson of Abraham, and if you remember, God changed Jacob's name to Israel a few chapters ago. As we think about our map and where these events took place, not a whole lot has changed here since chapter 45. We're going to read about Jacob's whole family moving down south to Egypt to be with Joseph so they don't starve during the famine. That's what we're going to be talking about here. So our main places on the map are Canaan, where Jacob used to live, and then Goshen down in Egypt, where he's going to live out the rest of his life. So let's talk about that in verses 1 through 7, the first section of our outline. Jacob's family moves to Egypt. Jacob went to Beersheba, and there he offered some sacrifices to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to him there and told him that he didn't need to be afraid to take his family down to Egypt. God was going to take his family down there safely, and then one day he would bring them out. But they would be brought out as a great nation. They would multiply exponentially before they came out of Egypt. And we'll read about that in the book of Exodus. Jacob's sons took their father, their wives, their children, and all of their possessions, and they utilized the wagons that Pharaoh had provided to take all of them down to Egypt and to find a new home there. The next section, verses 8 through 27, we're going to summarize a little bit. It's kind of a mini genealogy or a mini family tree of Jacob, his sons, and his grandsons, all listed by name, all the males who went down to Egypt with Jacob. So rather than reading 60 plus names on this list, I think what we'll do is I'll just mention the 12 sons of Jacob. And then if you want more information about the sons of Jacob's 12 sons, those are all listed on the PDF handout for your reference. But I think it's probably more helpful to have those and to read them for yourself and be able to sit down with those names if they're interesting to you, rather than me just reading a bunch of names that I can't pronounce on this video. So Jacob's 12 sons were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali. And then verse 27 tells us this: all the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And then finally, in verses 28 through 34, Joseph is reunited with his father, Jacob. So when Joseph heard that Jacob had made the journey from Canaan and was in Goshen, he prepared his chariot and he went and presented himself to his father after 20 plus years. And they had a happy reunion and they wept together. After this, the end of the chapter tells us that Joseph went and represented his brothers and his family before Pharaoh. And he told Pharaoh that they were herdsmen or shepherds by occupation. And Joseph's advocacy and his high position were They're important to note here because the end of the chapter tells us that Egyptians typically look down on shepherds. In fact, the text tells us that shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptians. So Joseph's representation of them before Pharaoh and his authority in the country probably made the transition a little bit easier for them and brought them some acceptance that they otherwise wouldn't have had. And so that is Genesis chapter 46. Everybody is safe and sound down in Egypt, ready to outlast the 5 years remaining of the famine. So let's talk about our application now. This is more of an application in terms of understanding your Bible study going forward rather than an application for daily living. The characters mentioned in this chapter are important to keep in mind as you read the rest of the Bible story. Store them away in your mind, some of these names, Joseph and his 12 brothers. As we previously mentioned, Israel's family is about to multiply exponentially and to become a nation of people. And Israel's 12 sons, and these names that we just read, they are going to become the heads of the tribes of that nation. The nation of Israel is the centerpiece of much of the rest of the Old Testament story. And just about all of God's work, well, at least this recorded for us in the Bible, centers around Israel, his 12 sons, and their children. When we move from Genesis to Exodus, we're going to very quickly summarize several centuries. And within those several centuries, the sons of Joseph, or rather the sons of Jacob, are going to multiply and have children and children and children until they're a nation of probably hundreds of thousands of people. But we'll save that for later. Just keep this in mind. God had promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and to make them into a great nation. And over the next couple chapters, we're going to see the beginning of the fulfillment of that promise. There's also a good lesson there. Don't forget about the chapters that we've already studied, because sometimes God waits quite a while to fulfill the promises that he makes. We're going to see that all over the Old Testament, really. And so try not to forget what we already studied, because it's all an interconnected story. These aren't separate stories that are meant to be read separately. They're meant to be read and understood together.